Before we get started, let's take a moment to talk about safety. Although most professional concrete workers have never had any problems, wet concrete can cause chemical burns in some circumstances. You'll see workers in this tape who are highly skilled but are not observing all of the proper safety guidelines. The best way to avoid problems is to take some simple common sense precautions. The key is to keep wet concrete from coming into contact with your skin. Start with the right clothing. When you're working with fresh concrete, this means full-length pants and a long-sleeve shirt. And don't roll the sleeves up. Use waterproof gloves and rubber boots high enough to keep the concrete out. When you're placing concrete or sawing concrete, wear goggles to protect your eyes. If you're using a saw, wear a dust mask or respirator and earplugs. When using curing compounds, follow the manufacturer's instructions. Solvent-based curing compounds may require the use of a respirator and other personal protective items. Fewer safety precautions may be necessary for water-based curing compounds. And don't forget to wear your hard hat if there are any potential overhead hazards or lateral movement of equipment in your work area. Follow these simple rules, and you'll always be dressed for safety. Proper finishing is essential to the quality and serviceability of a concrete slab. In order to achieve a durable surface, the finisher will use several different finishing tools. Each tool has a specific purpose, and it should not be used to do a task it was not designed to do. Skill in handling the tools will come only with practice. But first, it is important to develop the right techniques and understand the importance of timing. Finishing begins after the concrete has been satisfactorily placed, uniformly spread, and adequately consolidated. As a safety precaution, gloves should be worn when working with fresh concrete to prevent burns and also protect the worker's hands from cuts. The strike-off operation takes place first and is immediately followed by bull floating or derbying. It is important that both these operations be performed before bleed water collects on the surface. Bleed water is excess water in the mix that rises to the surface due to settlement of the solid materials within the concrete. Strike-off is required to remove excess concrete and bring the top surface to proper grade. The tool used can be a piece of 2x4 lumber specially selected for straightness or a straight edge specially made for the purpose. The length of the straight edge should be such that it will always be in contact with both side forms during the entire strike-off operation. Strike-off is the one most important operation to producing a true plane surface. Strike-off is accomplished by moving the straight edge forward across the top of the side forms in a back-and-forth sawing motion. The forward motion removes excess concrete and brings the surface to proper grade. As the straight edge is moved forward, the top edge should be tilted slightly away from the direction of travel to produce a cutting edge. The back-and-forth sawing motion helps prevent tearing the surface of the concrete and produces a relatively smooth and level surface. A small amount of excess concrete, about 1 inch, should be kept ahead of the straight edge at all times to fill in low spots. If the amount of excess concrete becomes too great, there is a tendency for the surface to tear. To prevent this, remove some of the excess concrete with a square-ended shovel or a come-along, a hoe-like tool with a blade 4 inches high and 20 inches long. More than one pass of the straight edge may be needed to level the surface. Immediately after strike-off, derbies or bull floats are used to level ridges and fill in low spots left by the strike-off operation. Bull floats are large, long-handled, flat, rectangular floats made of wood or magnesium. Derbies are hand-manipulated straight edges, usually 3 to 8 feet long, made of wood or magnesium. Wood derbies and bull floats are preferred for use on non-Aaron-trained concrete. The wood's texture makes them less likely to seal the surface. Magnesium darbies and bull floats should be used on air-entrained concrete to prevent tearing the surface. Since darbying or bull floating must be completed before bleed water comes to the surface, care must be taken not to seal the surface. If the surface is sealed, bleed water will collect just beneath the surface and create a weakened plane. If that happens, the surface will tend to blister or lift off during finishing, or scale off after the concrete hardens. Bull floating or darbying serves to slightly embed the large aggregate particles and work up a slight amount of paste on the surface to facilitate subsequent finishing operations. Bull floating is done perpendicular to the direction of travel of the straight edge. To avoid creating high spots in the area along the side forms, be sure to bring the float blade all the way back to the side form. If voids or depressions remain and no excess concrete is left on the slab, additional concrete should be added and the surface floated again. When a magnesium bull float is used, the float blade must be held flat at all times to prevent sealing the surface. When a wood bull float is used, the float blade should be pushed ahead with the handle held low and the front raised, so it will not dig into the concrete surface, then pulled back with the float blade held flat to level high spots and fill voids. Because of its long handle, close tolerances are difficult to achieve with a bull float. When surfaces with close tolerances are required, the use of the darby is preferred. Hold the darby flat against the surface of the concrete and work with a sawing arc motion, cutting off high spots and filling voids. Keeping the darby as flat as possible helps avoid sealing the surface. When the surface is level, the darby should be tilted slightly and worked in a sweeping motion to fill small holes left by the sawing motion. On some slabs, darbying and bull floating may be all the finishing that is required. However, on most slabs, darbying or bull floating is followed by one or more other finishing operations. Before any of these finishing operations can begin, the finisher must wait until all the bleed water has left the surface. On hot, dry, windy days, the waiting period may be very short. On cool, humid days, it can be several hours. With air-entrained concrete, there may be little or no waiting, since air-entrained concrete bleeds very little. Any finishing operation performed on the surface of the concrete slab while bleed water is present can cause serious crazing, dusting, or scaling on the surface of the hardened concrete. This also applies to any water sprinkled on the surface of the concrete to facilitate finishing. Finishing can begin when the bleed water sheen has evaporated and the concrete will sustain foot pressure with only about a 1/4 inch indentation. For the experienced finisher, this is usually determined by pushing on the surface with the fingertips. Edging compacts the concrete next to the form where floating and troweling are less effective, making it more durable and less likely to spall and chip. Preliminary edging should be done with an edging tool approximately 10 inches long and 6 inches wide. Edging tools are usually made of stainless steel. Thin-lipped edgers with a 1/2 inch radius are recommended for walks, driveways, and patios. To form the radius, hold the edger almost flat on the concrete surface and run it in a forward and backward motion with the front slightly raised in the forward direction and the rear slightly raised in the backward direction. Be careful not to leave too deep an impression, as these indentations may be difficult to remove in subsequent finishing operations. A narrow edger can be used later for a second pass. However, the narrow edger is more likely to rotate, and care must be taken not to dig into the surface. Edging may be required after each subsequent finishing operation. During or immediately after edging, the slab should be jointed. Proper jointing can eliminate unsightly random cracks that may form when a slab contracts due to drying shrinkage. Grooving tools for jointing are made of stainless steel or other materials and are available in various sizes and styles. The cutting edge or bit should be deep enough to cut 1/4 the depth of the slab. Otherwise, shrinkage cracking may not be controlled. Do not use a tool with a worn-out or shallow cutting edge to form control joints. A properly tooled joint can add to the appearance of the finished slab. It is good practice to mark the location of each joint on both side forms. A straight 1-inch board, at least 6 inches wide, should be used to guide the grooving tool. To form the joint, the grooving tool is pushed into the concrete and moved forward, while pressure is applied to the back of the tool. After the joint is cut, the tool is pulled back over the groove to give it a smoother finish. After edging and jointing, the surface is floated. Floating serves to remove any imperfections left in the surface by previous operations and to compact the mortar at the surface in preparation for any further finishing operations. Hand floats are made of wood or magnesium. Magnesium floats are recommended for most work, especially air-entrained concrete. Wood floats tend to drag and, if not used at the proper time, stick to and tear the surface of the concrete. Magnesium floats slide more easily across the surface of the concrete, reducing the amount of effort required to float the surface. The float should be held flat on the surface and worked in a sweeping arc motion to fill holes and remove ridges left from previous operations. Floating produces a relatively even texture. Since this texture has good skid resistance, it is often used as a final finish for sidewalks, driveways, and patios. If it is used as a final finish, it may be necessary to float the surface again after the surface has partially hardened. When a smooth, dense surface is desired, such as on a basement floor slab, floating should be followed by steel troweling. Do not trowel the surface until it has been floated. Bull floating or derbying is not enough. A steel trowel at least 18 inches long by 4 3/4 inches wide is recommended for first troweling. For first troweling, always use a trowel that has been broken in, a trowel with a slight curvature to the blade along its width. Work the trowel as flat as possible in a sweeping arc motion. Tilting the trowel at too steep an angle will produce an objectionable washboard or chatter pattern on the surface. Overlap each of the passes by 1/2. In this manner, each troweling covers the area twice. One troweling may be all that is required. However, surface smoothness and wear resistance can be improved with additional trowelings. A slip-resistant surface can be produced by brooming before the concrete has thoroughly hardened. Broomed finishes are created by pulling a broom across freshly floated or troweled surfaces once the surface has stiffened enough to retain the texture. The best results are obtained with brooms that are specifically made for texturing concrete. Coarse textures are produced by stiff bristle brooms. Medium to fine textures are obtained by using soft bristle brooms. For sharp uniform textures, remove excess concrete from broom bristles. Slabs are usually broomed transversely to the main direction of travel. Once the basic techniques of finishing have been learned, there are a variety of colors, textures, and special techniques that can be used to produce decorative finishes. Color can be added to the surface of a concrete slab by using a dry shake of the desired color. Textures can be produced with floats, trowels, and brooms during the finishing operation. An exposed aggregate surface provides a rugged, attractive surface. Patterns can also be formed on the surface with divider strips or by scoring or stamping the surface first before the concrete hardens. Remember, finishing is an ordered sequence of steps, and if followed, will produce a concrete surface that is both durable and attractive. This has been a presentation of the Portland Cement Association and the Aberdeen Group.